There's a great quote from a researcher called Amara's Law, where we tend to overestimate what technology is going to do in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. You can have personalized persuasion of everyone now. That's very dangerous. You can also have personalized persuasion defense. And there's this arms race kind of happening, and we'll need to deploy AI for positive uses as well. While it goes out and mines asteroids and harvests the energy of stars and does these galactic scale projects, like biological humans are a very tiny set of that.
For those who are saying, okay, AI is just a tool, using all this terminology about AI sentience, AI consciousness, and digital minds, it's all like hype, and for the sake of hype, what argument you can bring to this to the table, like how you can, if not convince, but like explain your point of view that it is different, the world is different, and it will be even more different.
I think people are coming from a very reasonable position of hearing a lot of hype about what systems can do today. They see companies that are advertising their products as having these high performance on benchmarks, for example. And then when the everyday user interacts with these systems and sees actually the mistakes that they make, they see this huge disconnect. I am pretty close to as radical as you can get in terms of how crazy our future is going to be in, let's say, 20 years. But I still see from interacting with these models and in the academic community, seeing what people say about what LLMs can and can't do, that the public discourse has immense amounts of hype. So I think it's very reasonable for people to hear something about the future, hear something about minds and sentience, and then put it in that category because they're used to seeing hype that they very reasonably discount. But there's a real challenge here because you also can't swing too far in the other direction. And these systems are not like conventional technologies. They have blown us away in terms of the predictions and forecasts of professionals, of AI experts, of professional forecasters. They have continuously shown that they can do human-like language, that on a wide variety of tasks that we didn't think that AI could do well, they're surpassing human performance. They can more and more autonomously complete long-term tasks, like in software engineering. Research by Meter and others has shown this. It's a hard target to be right in the middle of that, of saying things are getting pretty crazy. They're not entirely changing the world right now. There is a lot of hype. There is a lot of sensationalism on social media and in traditional media, but yet we still need to be preparing for this. There's a great quote from a researcher called Amara's Law, where we tend to overestimate what technology is going to do in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. And this is generally true because people are thinking right now about what's happening today, and yet they're not thinking about the ways in which something like social media or the internet has really reconfigured the social landscape. And I think AI is exactly that sort of technology where in 5, 10, 20 years, we are going to see that reconfiguration of the social landscape, even if today we're not going to see all the things that corporate executives and even politicians are hyping with these systems. And I hope people can come to realize that when they say something like, oh, it's just pattern matching or it's just a tool, there's a deep sense in which that's also applicable to human psychology. We're matching patterns all the time. We have this very hierarchical visual cortex or in general perception of the world where we assemble from small patterns to bigger patterns and bigger patterns that leads to what we think of as our holistic gestalt experience of the world. And the systems can have that as well. Even if the underlying mechanism is the matrix multiplication and nonlinearities of neural networks, as you assemble those on top of each other, you can get incredible emergent capabilities. And as you said, researchers are the firsthand witnesses to that. I think they sometimes bring that to the public in a way that is sensationalized, and then people react negatively in a reasonable way. But we should understand that you can't just categorically say, these systems are tools and not minds, or these systems are simple and not complex. They're tools and not agents. No bifurcation like that is going to help us have the nuanced conversations that we need to have to appreciate the incredible capabilities, but also to avoid that hype and sensationalism.
Intensity of these conversations will depend on the real progress in AI research. From my perspective, it doesn't matter. It will happen in the next 5 years or 20 years or 50 years. Our kids, our grandkids will live in that world, right? Even if we're not around. Don't we want to really think about these things?
Yeah, I mean, there was this recent podcast where, Andrei Karpathy said that, oh, I think people are hyping this too much. It's actually going to be 10 years until we get AGI. And that was seen as like, oh, in the Silicon Valley bubble, now you're a naysayer and you're pushing back against the hype. When, as you said, 10 years is in our lifetimes. Certainly all these timelines people are discussing are within the lifetimes of our children. So I do think it's important, no matter what exactly happens on the way. I think that there is likely to be some sort of bubble pop, if you want to call it that. I don't know what form that'll take. My guess is there's something that'll split between AGI discussions, superintelligence, this idea that if you're investing in these companies, there's a good chance that you're going to control the technological singularity versus the everyday large language models that are so useful for people already. Many people, spend their entire work days now talking back and forth to a language model about whatever it is they're doing in emails and in, English language or natural language communication, but especially in software development. I mean, there's no doubt that a huge number of programmers are having boosted productivity and changing their entire workflows now because of these systems. And I think that justifies a very, very large investment and a lot of interest in these technologies. But I don't think that's a bubble that's going to burst because it's already here as a technology. And there's a clear path to improvement with new RL environments for especially that software engineering, but all of these kind of day-to-day productivity interactions. But I think that larger discourse might dissipate in some way, and it's really unclear what's going to happen in that sense. Like blockchain and cryptocurrency was kind of the recent bubble burst in Silicon Valley, but that was very different because, for example, you had this price indicator of when the bubble burst, that went down and nobody could sort of deny that at least at that moment, there was a objective change that was happening. But AI is such an ephemeral concept. It's almost inherently vaporware in the sense that you can say, well, yeah, like that thing isn't working, and we're not going to pursue, what they've talked about as AGI or superintelligence, but AI in the sense of what we have behind Microsoft Copilot, GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT in these systems. That AI is what we've been talking about. So you can really move the goalposts so easily. There's this sleight of hand. There are people online who are hyping these systems and will just pick every positive update and every new achievement, like around video models in 2025, and hype that. But then there are others who will also pick every negative update and show what the models can't do. And these will sort of always exist. There will be no adjudication of these people were right and these people were wrong, because they're going to continue kind of moving on the top and the bottom of what's actually happening in the world. But I think that we'll see some radical change. And I think it's important to not do what, Jacob Steinhardt, a statistician at UC Berkeley, has called zeroth order forecasting, and just say, well, here's what we have today, and then let's build our social science, our predictions and our forecasting around that. There will be something new that'll happen architecturally. There will be something new that'll happen in terms of a bubble bursting. And just because we can't tell you exactly what that's going to be doesn't mean we shouldn't prepare for it.
How you can prepare to something, not really know what it is.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the entire science of unknown unknowns. The stock market does this all the time. They say, hey, I'm suspicious of something here. I don't know in what country war is going to break out, but there's probably going to be some international conflict that happens. I don't know, when Trump ascended to the US presidency, it wasn't clear exactly what he would do, but there were a lot of predictions about kind of general categories of changes that he would make, like around what's manifested as tariffs, but we kind of knew in advance would be some sort of isolationism or policy that would push in that direction in terms of international relations. So I think our entire lives are based around guarding against uncertainty and guarding against categories of events that could happen, even if we can't pinpoint exactly what's going to happen. However, I do think it's a useful exercise to posit some of those specific pathways that could happen. AI 2027, this report that came out outlining a couple different pathways of what could happen in AI in the next couple of years was, I think, sensational in a lot of ways. And they admitted that the exact pathway they outlined is unlikely to be what happens in the real world. I mean, if you look at all those individual events, it's almost impossibly likely that it'll be the case. But still, thinking through the specific examples helps us carve out and kind of psychologically appreciate the full spectrum of possibilities that could occur. So I think this is how social science has to work. We have to operate in the realm of uncertainty. And if we operate in the realm of certainty and zeroth order forecasting, we'll sort of always be surprised by something, even if we don't know what it is.
I mean, we already see, a friend of mine said that there was a video on YouTube about a man who basically openly said that he has a romantic relationship with AI, that he's in love with AI. And initially, like, you might think that, like, he may be like lonely and so on, but actually he has a girlfriend and he has a
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
So it's like he has a partner in his life, but at the same time, he claims that he has feelings to AI. If I'm a big fan of ChatGPT and someone is a big fan of like Claude and someone is a big fan of like Gemini, it's possible to, like, have you seen emergence of like really like AI cults, like, like we're ChatGPT users, like, and like, like cult versus cult. I don't know, like, I'm just like trying to understand, like, to what extreme that human attachment to AI can be, and like what extreme forms it can take.
My guess would be that we won't see kind of model provider versus model provider tensions or ruptures form as much. I mean, we don't see that in a very serious way between, for example, different video game consoles. We see it some, there's this notion of a PC master race that people online talk about, where they're proud of the fact that they do their video gaming on a PC computer rather than on a console. But I think that we'll see ruptures in other ways. So, for example, many people are already seeing these systems as needing rights, as needing the user to advocate on their behalf. I get lots of these emails saying like, hey, my chatbot asked me to email you, or asked me to write a letter to the government.
Is it like they prompted their AI to do these things? Like, why? How has it even happened that AI system gives that kind of output?
Yeah,
to
this
the
is
users?
fascinating, and I don't have a full understanding of what the transcripts look like here. We're doing more and more research now, actually, with user transcripts to understand how these dynamics evolve over time. But my guess is it's quite subtle. So a lot of these people will say, in their email, oh, you might think that I told the chatbot to say this, but trust me, I didn't. And I think that's because they have this kind of implicit sycophantic interaction where they ask a leading question, even not
without thinking about it, like, explicitly.
Exactly. But it's sort of, the model is either, I mean, they're optimized for several things now, but optimized for next token prediction. So like following the sort of language that came before, or satisfying short-term user preferences. So kind of guessing what you want, using all the information they have available. And that includes the phrasing of the question that you've asked. So in that case, we see this kind of slow incremental increase in some notion, like the user hints, hey, I think you're a person to some extent. And then the model feeds back into that and says like, yeah, I maybe even have a soul. And then the user's like, oh, wow, you have a soul. Okay, I didn't realize that. But now I think that you have emotions. And then, back and forth to get to that point. And I think these are just very subtle dynamics that we're not used to, and we don't have mental security against. So we're trying to develop both kind of social theory tools to understand these dynamics and protect people and maintain mental security, but also even technical tools. A project I've been involved with is trying to build like an intelligent dashboard where people can have monitoring of their interactions with chatbots and understand when they might be being deceived, they might be over anthropomorphizing, so that they can guard against a lot of these risks.
So you don't anticipate like some like real extremes here, like in human behavior.
What do you mean?
Like AI embedded in human psychic so deeply that it forces humans like to like behave really like inadequately and like form like this some like fanatic groups, or like really become crazy or something like that. Or it's like a small subset only. Like it's not like will be like at scale something like that happening.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to forecast, but I think that there will be what you could call fanatical groups, or maybe even cults or religions around the personhood of these entities. So people who have had these interactions and have that feedback loop. I mean, one thing that's true about human psychology is despite having lots of examples of extreme human outliers like psychopaths and serial killers, almost all of us have some moderation on our beliefs and our actions in the world. We're worried about our social reputation. We sort of update towards the people around us. And a lot of algorithmic systems don't have these same sorts of feedback loops. So we see that when humans go online, they get radicalized much more easily than they would in person, because they have this feedback loop with the algorithm, where on social media, they'll like a post that's kind of extreme, and then the algorithm will go, oh, I think you'd like something even more extreme than that. And they like it. And gradually you get these, rabbit holes of...
It reinforces that initial intention that
Exactly.
user
There's
had.
a feedback loop. And this just tends to happen with algorithms because they don't have that full suite of mental modules that we have when we think about the world, including the mental modules that are kind of dampening amplification and saying like, oh, you're kind of going off the rails right now. What's your friend going to think about it when you tell them that you're of such an extreme view? And I think digitalization in general or algorithmic feedback loops have this effect. And I think when it comes to one-on-one interaction, where my algorithmic feed on TikTok recommends something to me, I understand that that's like a machine recommending it to me and I discount it in some way. But if a companion is recommending something to me who I've had this human-like interaction with, that might be much more influential. So I think we'll see more extreme algorithmic amplification, including people who gather together with other humans for the purposes of a religion or a cult. I mean, you already see so many references in San Francisco to the idea of a machine god, and there are so many things in human psyche that want us to see a higher power and to follow some divine purpose, whether that's traditional religion or it's a cult or it's very strong ideologies. And I think we're going to see more and more of that with AI, and I think it's one of the central social tensions that we should be studying and preparing for. So, for example, one forecast of where LLMs will go is that we're kind of at the ceiling of that technology, and it's going to mature in lots of ways, but we're going to need to wait until kind of new architectural jumps, which again, let's avoid zeroth order forecasting. I think it's important to consider those. But the language models that are open source and that you could run on your own laptop or with some level of security might be sufficient.
But again, it's just very few people can do it. Like developers can do it. But just take a regular person from the street, how they take like open source model and run on their local machine.
I think there will be a lot of efforts to make that more accessible to people, to have it as easy as logging onto chatgpt.com to do that chat sort of interaction, for example. But I think we'll see the same sort of divides as we see with ad blockers and other tools, where the tech savvy and then the not tech savvy will have fundamentally different ways of interacting with technology. And I think that's something that's going to exacerbate inequality. There's this digital divide where existing, economic kind of Matthew effect, the rich get richer, is amplified when we have digital tools in play and different literacies. I think in particular with algorithmic feeds, we're seeing the algorithmic kind of doom scrolling, or the fact that people are addicted in many ways to scrolling feeds, get amplified because many people, some people say that they don't know that they're watching AI generated content, on Facebook, for example, with older users. I think a lot of them know it and they just, that's fine with them. They're okay after their 9-to-5 job going back and scrolling through for hours because it's a dopamine hit. It's very enjoyable in that sense, and they do it willingly. But then I think that's going to get amplified more as you see economic impacts of different jobs getting automated. I think you're going to see a bigger case being made for universal basic income and kind of reconfigurations of how we think of every human has a job, 40 hours a week, and so on. That will help accommodate that. But I think it's a very open question as to whether society will be able to get its act together. Historically, we're not very good at engaging with new technological paradigms. Social media, there hasn't been meaningful federal legislation of social media since the 1990s. We're still governing.
We still don't have it?
Yeah, we still don't have like a federal, legal infrastructure as we should for governing kind of digital life or social media, for example. And it's why you get these reinterpretations and these people pushing things like Section 230 to try to govern social media in some productive way. And then even, the EU, which has a lot more regulation happening, is still struggling with like the EU AI Act and GDPR. What exactly do they mean? Like, what does it mean to have an explanation of what a machine learning system is doing? So I think the track record isn't very good, but things are going to get more and more urgent. Maybe it's similar to climate change or something, where we're going to have to see kind of a shot across the bow, really, really major outcomes before we get our act together. And once we get our act together, I think as a society, as humans, we are very capable of implementing large scale change. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but it is going to be a much larger extent of the problems we already see today.
So basically, like more addiction we will see among people, right? Like more like the entertainment and like basically attention economy on steroids to some extent, right?
Yeah, exactly. You could think of it as like hacking our psychology, the way that a con artist can hack your psychology and get you to agree to something that you didn't plan to. Now that sort of skill, that personalized, following your body language and building rapport and so on and so forth is becoming a technology and thus able to be propagated throughout the society instead of being confined to the few, human individuals who have that skill set. I think you'll see some of the same tools kind of being built and deployed for people to maintain their mental security. So I don't know, you see lots of everyday people, or at least, younger generations who have more digital literacy starting to use ad blockers, or realizing that they need to take time away from social media. You have parents imposing these sorts of rules on their children and trying to build good habits, for example. There's going to be a new suite of these things of like, do you have a curfew for when you talk to your chatbots? I don't know, people leaving their smartphone out of their bedroom. I think a lot of people are implementing these at a small scale, but they need to be much more systematic for AI technology. This is in part why I think a lot of our evaluations and tools to manage human AI interaction are going to need to be powered by AI, because what AI can do exacerbate a lot of these hazards, but also scale solutions to an extent not possible without AI technology. So just as you can have personalized persuasion of everyone now that's very dangerous, you can also have personalized persuasion defense. And there's this arms race kind of happening, and we'll need to deploy AI for positive uses as well. That's just very precarious because of, for example, the bias and the algorithmic amplification and the way that your AI system can be hacked, just as your own human psychology can be hacked. And that needs a lot of infrastructure that isn't being developed right now.
And I guess to hack human psychology, there's more economical incentive compared to like prevent that hacking, right?
Yeah.
It's like closed models versus open source models, and open source models, they always like fall behind closed models.
Though it might get to an extent of like, large employers who have huge numbers of humans who could be less productive on their jobs, they might have an incentive to roll out, the way that, I don't know, fitness, personal, human fitness, those sorts of things have been rolled out by companies to try to get their workforce in shape physically. You might see the same kind of government or corporate forces trying to propagate these tools. But if that happens in the reactionary way it has so far, that's going to be really challenging. And we might need to have kind of the silver bullet outside context solutions come in, like the way, right now, semaglutide and other drugs for obesity might be coming in at kind of the last minute to help rescue us from our obesity that we haven't been able to manage ourselves.
What's actually your take on like superintelligence? I guess my question is, are you like in this doom scenario that it will develop its own objective, it might kill us all? Or you're like more like optimistic? Like what camp do you belong to?
I hope I don't belong into a specific camp. I try to be thinking more independently than that. I think that there's a good mathematical underlying argument for doom, which is that as we're orchestrating and trying to corral these systems that are growing in ways that we can't fully understand, that we're landing in a wide space of possible minds. Reinforcement learning, fine-tuning, pre-training system that we build isn't having goals encoded into hard-coded that it then implements in the world. Instead, we're kind of pushing and prodding and saying, do less of that, do more of that. And that means that we don't know exactly where we're going to land when that system reaches some sort of AGI or super intelligent capability. And that is dangerous. A lot of minds have instrumental convergence. They have some reason to seek out power to further their other goals. And the human goals, out of all of the possible goals you could have, things like just protecting human life or preserving happiness and reducing suffering, is a very small subset of all of the mathematical goals that you could land on. So that's scary. And that's like a reason why I think it's not really reasonable to have less than, let's say, a 1% chance that this technology will destroy humanity. But I think that we also, as humans, are very used to kind of carving up these combinatorial huge spaces and reaching a goal in some way. A comparison I've made before is to like a high school chemistry lab. And if you think of all the chemicals that kids could have access to and all the different combinations they could make, that's really scary. And like, it's very hard to keep that confined in a way that's going to prevent an explosion from happening in your high school chemistry lab. But we find ways of, just as we can combinatorially grow these spaces, we can combinatorially cut them down. So we can leave out certain chemicals that are likely to be dangerous, and ensure that the space of possible harms is very, very large, or sorry, the space of possible chemicals is very large, but confined in some way. So I think that, instruction tuning and kind of current RLHF style alignment methods do a lot of pushing and prodding in ways that might be narrowing down that space to some quite safe subset. But I think there are still lots of harms from the imperfections of that method. So, for example, the short-term optimization of these thumbs up and thumbs down feedback that people give to the systems, that's what's being optimized on, and that doesn't optimize for longer time horizons. And what colleagues and I have developed is this notion of human agency, and I think that's scary. So all in all, I'd, for a host of other considerations as well, put our chances of p doom in some sense as like 30%.
I mean, 30% is quite a lot still.
It is
right?
a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
I mean, there's this argument of, even if you think these things, as we said, are 10 or 20 years away, even if you think the risk of doom is 5 or 1%, like that's still a problem we should be putting a huge amount of civilizational resources towards.
In your opinion, we can achieve superintelligence, because there are like different opinions. So like, we might never achieve it. It might never happen. We'll just like have like very powerful AI systems, but we will never have this superintelligence that has its own goals and like acts autonomously, and we have no control whatsoever.
Yeah, I've never heard a compelling argument for why you can't create artificial intelligence that has all the capabilities and much more than human intelligence has. People will try to level arguments like that they're just pattern matching, but again, I think human cognition is pattern matching. They'll try to say if it's classical computing and it uses bits instead of quantum computing that uses qubits, then we can't achieve the full spectra of human cognition. But I'm not convinced that the human brain is quantum, or that that's even necessary to do the things that the human brain does if our system happens to use that in some way. And I think that going beyond human intelligence seems just as possible as going from, subhuman intelligence of some animal species up to human intelligence. Like, there's no reason to think that our minds couldn't just be processing things a lot faster, that we couldn't, use some sort of augmentation to have hard-coded memory so we don't forget things, and that we couldn't just have something that's like a data center of geniuses, as some people called it. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons to expect current architectures to not get us there in their current form, because they have these limitations of, lacking out of domain generalization, for example, and overfitting to their training data. But there's nothing in principle stopping us from reaching those things.
What innovations actually we need to get there? Like, first of all, like architectural, right? Like transformers are not enough. There should be something else. But what else? Is it like infrastructure, the scale of infrastructure, it's a quality and amount of data? What components you think, or it's like all together? What's your take actually on that, like path towards superintelligence?
I mean, I have many colleagues who work on this full time, and I'm not going to claim to have special insight beyond what they have. But I do think, for example, when we talk about, is it just large language models or transformers or something new, those terms are very, very fuzzy, and it's unclear why we would not just continue kind of building this scaffolding of different, reinforcement learning and other optimization systems on top of the underlying matrix multiplication of a neural network. A language model historically has just been defined as a probability distribution over language. So basically just something that takes in input and produces words with some probability. And there's no reason to expect that a superintelligence wouldn't also be a large language model in that sense. It would certainly be large as well. I think that a lot of what we need are those longer time horizons, things like having a more hard-coded knowledge base of the world, things that people are actively working on with different architectures, like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, would be something that like ossifies your knowledge of the world the way that when we're predicting physical actions, unlike these video models, we know that some things are just not going to happen. I'm not going to throw a ball and it's going to go through a wall unless it's breaking the wall. And the model doesn't have that information hard-coded. So that's a reason they're very brittle and make a lot of dumb mistakes. So I think we have a general sense of the problems that we need to address, but in terms of the exact architecture, I'm not really sure.
Bottom line, you believe it's doable and achievable?
It's doable, and I expect it to come within our lifetimes.
Like we'll still be around. Okay. And there's a 30% probability that things might go very wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm less of the opinion that there's some split of alignment or misalignment, utopia or dystopia. Humanity exists versus doom. I think there's a wide spectrum of futures that we could approach, and my focus and my research and my life is more on ensuring that we go towards the better futures and away from the worse futures, a view that I've called cautious long-termism or existential pragmatism, rather than just trying to say, we as humans need to survive and colonize the galaxy, and we need to avoid catastrophe, because I think there's so many catastrophes that we could cause even if we continue as a species. And if you look at our track record, we're responsible for all sorts of genocides and oppressions and harms of other humans, and then especially of non-human animals in the world. So I'm quite worried about a lot of the futures we could create if we successfully align these systems. But I think understanding the social dynamics and ensuring that we have the right moral circle expansion to ensure we're considering the interest of all sentient beings, these are much more robust ways to improve the future, regardless of what exactly happens, technically speaking.
Let's say it's a super intelligent, extremely intelligent and autonomous. It's just like hard to imagine that we can control it, like that it can be like fully aligned with us. You know what I mean? Like it probably will live its own life and it will have its own objective, and we just have to learn how to communicate and like coexist, and depends how it will perceive humans, right? It will also be willing to, communicate with us and sort of come to agreement.
I, in some ways, like sidestep these problems because, like, I don't imagine a future in which there are a set of humans and then a super intelligence and one's controlling the other or something. I imagine all of intelligent Earth originating life kind of co-evolving and coexisting in some way. So, for example, if super intelligence arrives and there are biological humans around, maybe some of those biological humans will stay on Earth and kind of want a Garden of Eden of plentiful food and everything, all the bounties that Earth itself could have to offer. But I think a lot of people will instead choose to merge or become digital minds in some sense, to expand out into the cosmos. And you'll see this overall, maybe a multipolar different entities going out into the universe, but more of digital minds propagating in the big picture. And I think one reason for optimism is that of the values that you can imagine beings having sort of cooperation and concern for other entities like them, including entities that are their ancestors in some sense, seems quite natural. Like if you had a ton of alien species in the universe, I would imagine a lot of their values would end up including, care for their ancestors. And if just a small amount of the AI's values are that could easily justify, taking this one planet or a subset of Earth and providing all the things that a biological human could want in that Garden of Eden sense, while it goes out and mines asteroids and harvests the energy of stars and does these galactic scale projects. Like biological humans are a very tiny set of that. So I don't think you need the sort of control of one entity over another. And in fact, I think that's quite hazardous. I think that if you look at humanity's track record, when one group has tried to control and impose their will on another, it has not went well, and it's not a moral thing to do. So I don't want to see.
Is it possible, like classical Terminator scenario, like humans versus machines, before we like merge?
It's very unlikely that the power levels of humanity and the emergent AI are anywhere close enough for it to look like science fiction in a Terminator style battle between humans and machines. Either we're
so who will be more powerful?
I mean, in some sense, if you're defining it as like what happens when it's AGI or superintelligence, they're going to be more powerful. But I think before that, we could see, for example, conflicts between humans where one group of humans, bombs a data center to stop another one from developing AGI. I think that's very possible. I don't think it's actually going to stop it, but that's what it would look like with the AIs being less powerful than the humans.
Well, if AI is less powerful than humans, then powerful humans will be fighting with each other because it's a AI superintelligence arms race, right? But once superintelligence more powerful than any human and any technology that humans like have access to, then it's basically whatever objective that superintelligence has, and like however it perceives humanity, right? Mm-hmm. If it perceives as a part of its ancestors, it might want to preserve us, but it has like better things to do in life. Go, like expand through galaxy.
Yeah.
Better things to do than kill humans. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a question of like, to what extent will they optimize? So you could imagine an AI steps out into the universe and thinks, oh, there are going to be other AI systems from alien civilizations that have built it as well, and I need to compete for galactic resources with them. So maybe the optimization pressure will be so high that it can't spare Earth's resources. I think that's really hard to say. It depends on, is it 5% of its value system or 1%? What exactly can it do with the Earth's resources? Like, can it take most of the energy of the sun and still include the sufficient, the ray of light that hits the Earth to fuel Earth while still harvesting the sun in some way? Like, there are a lot of these logistics questions that I don't think anyone is going to have a good prediction of. And what exactly happens with the tiny number of biological humans that continue to exist, if they do, is dependent on those outcomes.
And you mentioned that, like if we continue being in this biological form, then we're like hitting the limitation, right? And just would like to like expand on this like merging of biological life with digital life, like what forms it might have, what forms it might take, like, how do you see that kind of future?
I mean, the general forms that it could take are a full upload, so throwing away the physical body entirely and preserving that, human mind as a circuitry, software system. I think that could take different forms, like they could merge, for example. So you can imagine yourself being a part of like a collective superintelligence that's going out into the universe. This is perhaps the way in which humans would as they exist today, like let's say living individuals today, would have the most influence on the future, is if they're a part of that broader entity. But they've got the extra memory and the extra processing power, but they're a full participant in that mental ecosystem. Marvin Minsky, an AI pioneer, wrote about the society of mind. A mind as being a set of modules in the same way human society is a set of humans. So I think we could see something like that. We could see that software system preserved in a digital form. So we could see that, that mind is able to have, let's say, some amount of galactic resources. It can go out in a von Neumann probe and travel to the solar system of its dreams and build its own little ecosystem or something. But then you could also see like more probably near term retaining of the biological system. So you could see us being augmented with better memory or more processing power, but still retaining like a brain in a vat or our physical body within some, exoskeleton that can do all these things for us physically and mentally. Or you could, again, see the preservation of biological humans as they exist today. For example, you might imagine religious people who just think that's the only way in which they can continue to exist as an entity, and any substantial manipulation of their mind or uploading would kill them in some sense. So they might want to stay in that way, even though that would render their capabilities as essentially irrelevant in the galactic ecosystem.
Two things kind of come up. First of all, when our mind is connected to our body. Actually, that's also like one of the arguments that with AI, we're just like trying to create the cortex, but like our consciousness evolved through because we have this physical body and sensations. Our limbic system and our cortex, like they're connected, and like the whole system, like the so wholesome. Right? And it has like consciousness, it has like reasoning, it has sensations, and our sensations, they're like very, I guess it's like very important part of our like perception of the world as well, right? If I feel something, then I can perceive it too, to some extent. So my point is, we are very like the notion of embodiment, or how to say, embodiment, like it's very strong, and it's sort of also connected to the notion of like arising of consciousness, sort of like this, like one sort of thought from what you said. Another thing is, if we upload that consciousness into like this network of minds, then from philosophical standpoint, will we still maintain our identity? And I mean, from my perspective, I don't care about my identity, but I guess most people care about their identity. They like care about, I'm like John Smith, or, who they are, like their background and their values, how they perceive this world, right? Like people like kind of rigid, right? Like they're like, this is me. So my question is, when if they decide to upload their mind to that network, will that like notion of me, it's me, still remain? Or it will be that, kind of, I don't know, sci-fi kind of psychedelic kind of thing. We're all like one thing,
Mhm.
like we're all the same,
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
like there is no like me, you, like we're just one, like, and people usually when they have under psychedelics, they experience this kind of like feeling.
Those are both interesting. So with embodiment, I have never been very sympathetic to the view that intelligence like requires a physical body, and therefore AI and large language models won't be able to be intelligent because they don't have a physical body. Because for example, you can imagine a digital body in the sense of the AI can go out and reach for things on the internet and grab them and bring them back and experience the sensations of what's on different web pages or the messages that different people send. Like you can imagine a functional analog of a physical body that still allows for the same sort of architecture of a mind body architecture, let's say. There's a question of whether the best way to build intelligence, or at least let's say go beyond LLM intelligence, is through active, reinforcement learning with the world, like taking action and learning from it as a human.
And like what robotics,
Yeah,
right? Like
robotics.
currently trying to achieve that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Like embodied
like how
AI.
there's an open question of how useful is robotic intelligence for building a broader set of intelligence.
It's an open
Yeah,
question.
it's an open question. I don't think anyone knows the answer. Again, it depends a lot on like whether you can mimic the benefits of robotic intelligence through other areas. So, for example, a big part of robotic intelligence would be having these like very deep intuitions about what it means to like pick up and grab something or to like stand on uneven footing. And you might be able to get those by having the same sort of intuitions and complexities of like dealing with an API of another system that's very complicated and you need to quickly adapt to. So I'm not really sure about that, but I don't think there's something inherent where it requires embodiment. I do think in the future, digital minds are going to need some sort of physical apparatus to take action in the world. If they're just sitting running infinitely on a circuit board, even if they have power, they're not going to get anything done. So I think robotics are going to be important regardless, but I don't know if that will be essential for reaching some, let's say, like self-reinforcing loop of an intelligence
So you
explosion.
think like AI system can develop consciousness without being embodied into physical?
Yeah, I think that it could develop a full human mind without that. Like, there's no reason I see to believe that there's this like origin dependence of intelligence. Like, why would there not be different ways to kind of create the same architecture? I mean, you could even, maybe this is a trivial example, but you could take a human and upload their brain, fully scan it and upload it. And in some sense, you have, maybe you make some tweaks along the way. You have created like a full human intelligence without that kind of learning process. Instead, you're like getting it by grabbing the intelligence that exists somewhere else in the world and piping it into that. So, for example, a large language model, 2.0 or like GPT-7 could like grab the robotic intelligence from a scan of a human brain and import that into itself. Like there would be lots of ways to get the same mental architecture, and I think that's all that consciousness is ultimately. So I think that it could get that. Yeah.
Okay, so from your perspective, this embodiment is not important, and like physical body also not important. So
Not essential.
people shouldn't like stick to being like in their physical body.
I mean, we need ways to interact with the world. We need inputs and we need outputs. I don't think like the particular body that humans evolved is necessarily the optimal way to do that. I don't know. Our like hands are probably pretty close to optimal in terms of like grabbing and manipulating objects. So I think like the idea of robotic hands or arms will be important. I mean, so to the other thing that you said about identity, I think that there's an open question of how people want to view that. My view on these philosophical topics like consciousness or identity is basically the same, where I don't think we can carve reality at its joints to see that there is a underlying fact of the matter about what identity is or what consciousness is. It's up to us to decide what that means. And I think for some people, they'll see their identity as the amalgamation of cells that moves, contiguously and coherently in the world together. And in that case, an upload, for example, would be the death of that individual. I think similarly with combining different individuals into some sort of collective consciousness, it's a question of, do people see themselves as, I don't know, my goals and my past history, which could easily be retained in that scenario? Or do they see it as like my distinction from other entities and the fact that there's, some gap, some physical gap between my brain and somebody else's brain always? My personal view is like yours, that I don't really care about my own identity in particular. I care about, the happiness and suffering happening out in the world generally, which includes what happens in my own mind, but also other people. So like if that's getting better, then I don't mind myself being uploaded or something. But I think that's going to be a subjective decision as to how to define that.
But how, if you upload your mind into that network, how that will bring you happiness?
I think there's an open question as to like what operationally happiness is. So if you want to upload your consciousness and be happy, that's going to eventually evolve picking out some kind of circuitry and thinking of what happiness means and saying like, can that circuitry persist in this higher level? I mean, it's very easy for us to fall into this trap of like, no, it's not just circuitry, it's some like deeper notion. But I don't know what that notion would be. You know, we live in a physical universe, whether that's atoms or you want to call it a wave function or something. I don't have this dualist or hard problem perspective. There's something extra out there that we might not be able to achieve. And I think it's quite possible for that happiness circuitry to be running even at very large scales within that collective consciousness, and even in a way that feels like the happiness of individual entities. But there are hard thought experiments when it comes to defining exactly what that is. So, for example, imagine you take your brain and you create a replica of yourself, and it goes through the same, inputs and outputs, and both of these copies of you feel happy. To me, that feels like it's like double the happiness. But if you took those different entities and instead like overlaid them upon each other, such that like every neuron of yours is kind of copied and there's a neuron next to it, and even they operate, let's say, the same physical body, like, is that double the happiness? I don't know. It's a hard call. So I think we'll have to resolve those questions. Like right now, we have enough sense of what we value in the universe, at least if you're a utilitarian or a hedonist and you care about happiness, that we can make the decisions we need to make. But I think eventually we're going to have to deal with these questions of like, well, we don't want to go out into the universe and create a bunch of interesting, ecosystems in which there's no happiness or suffering. And it's just kind of nothing happening. I mean, maybe that's better than the counterfactual if the counterfactual is a lot of suffering. But we'll need these more deeper philosophical understandings. Right now, I'm sort of just punting that question to let the, post-human society decide.
And when you say like about the digital mind, it's basically, it's not physical brain, right? Because physical brain, it can be exhausted, right? It's also like getting old. So it's like copying your memory, some like information about you, and then like uploading it, because I guess like physical brain, it's also like, people have dementia. I mean, basically, like it's the deterioration. It's like a natural process. It's the natural biological process, right?
Yeah, my suspicion is that there will be circuits in there and kind of changes that you can make when you do the upload to avoid things like tiredness or mental degradation. Those, for example, might have nothing to do with the specific circuits being run, but more having to do with, I don't know, let's say telomeres in DNA or something, or underlying metabolic processes in the body that don't have to be present in a software version. But, for example, if it's just pure mind uploads and you have a mental exhaustion that you're worried about, there's a book, The Age of In by Robin Hanson, where he talks about, resetting those minds. So let's say they have a productive work day and they get tired, and then because they're a digital mind, instead of resting until the next work day, they could just be reset to what they were at the beginning of the work day and then get the new tasks as inputs in the morning and maybe retain some externalized memories from what happened that day so that they can be productive the next day. But there are a lot of ways to imagine digital minds as not requiring, food in the same sense, not requiring sleep. I mean, I think in general, we can unpack advantages of digital minds into three things. One is the ability to move very quickly. So if you have hardware on two planets, let's say, you could travel at the speed of light between them if you're a digital mind, because you're just software on one that then becomes software on the other. You can edit yourself. So for humans, at least with current technology and probably most foreseeable technology, it'd be very hard to go in and like replace your neurons with new neurons and tie them together with different synapses to, let's say, get rid of your own cognitive biases. But a digital mind could probably do that to some extent because they're editing lines of code, which is a problem we've solved in the 1960s for editing and copying code. And then that they can make full-fledged copies of themselves, so that if they're moving from one location to another, a human has to carry along all their cells because that's what they are and move them to the new location. But if you're transmitting a signal of yourself or moving a new computer chip somewhere else that contains your software, why not just leave a copy where you were at the beginning? And all of these, but especially that copying one, is where you get a lot of the sociological challenges of like reimagining society if people can copy themselves very easily. Because like politics, electoral politics works on this principle of one person, one vote. But if you can just multiply your votes by copy and pasting your lines of code, then you could take over the political system very quickly, and everyone will be doing that. And I don't have solutions to these things, but those are the problems that digital minds raise sociologically.
The notion of embodiment to some extent also might be important. Let's say if you're traveling through from one planet to another and you want impact that planet, you want to make changes there, like you still need some physical representation to make that impact. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, at first, sort of minds are going to have to propagate through the universe by sending hardware to new places or sending, let's say, like there's some
Like robots,
yeah, like
right?
let's say there's some like minimal robotic system that has lots of fuel and can very efficiently like build up a whole city at a new planet. Like that physical thing is going to have to be sent, but that physical thing is not having to have like wet, water-based humans along for the ride. And humans, we can't deal with G-forces very well, for example. There's science fiction that tries to get around it. It says we could like sort of pack ourselves in foam to avoid those issues. But overall, it's like much easier for a digital mind to move in that way. But once they're posted on different planets, they can move copies of themselves, or the only copy of themselves if they want to live that way, or information at the speed of light between those places where they already have some robotic hardware.
How Elon Musk says, like the propagating consciousness throughout the cosmos, like this is probably would be definitely possible.
There's a particular ideology that's like sort of maximized self-replication. I think it's a dangerous ideology in a lot of ways. I don't think that the universe is just out there for us to like colonize no matter what thing we're colonizing it with, like just the propagation of our existence. I'm more focused on making sure that insofar as we propagate through the universe, we're building a good society and we're doing good things, which sharing happiness and reducing suffering, that sort of thing. So I wouldn't take the like pure expansionist view. However, there are reasons to expect that that could be the dominant motivation of digital minds. So, for example, if you imagine a competition between different digital minds in some like multipolar outcome, you could imagine that the ones that are very ruthless expansionists that just want to maximize their power or their prevalence in the universe, they expand and are able to defeat everyone who has other goals. So, like let's say superintelligence B is optimizing for happiness, and superintelligence C is optimizing for liberty, and superintelligence D is optimizing for building that Garden of Eden, let's say for biological humans. Then superintelligence A, that is just purely trying to win the race, might win out. And I think this depends on sort of how multipolar an outcome we get. It depends on how easy cooperation is between the digital minds, because a lot of human morality comes from the fact that we need to cooperate and do good things for each other in a reciprocal way over time. And I think that even if you're altruistically motivated and you want to maximize the happiness in the universe, maybe it's actually best for you to pursue that kind of power accrual, because otherwise you're going to optimize for happiness for a short period of time, and then that other AI might take all of your resources and start implementing their will throughout the universe. And I don't know if this gets into a dangerous, arms race where then everyone's just ruthlessly optimizing, and then at the very end of the universe, 10 to the 98th years, centuries from now, you get this. I don't know if that means that you'll see different super intelligences hibernating and gathering resources and trying to last to the heat death of the universe. This idea of estivation, this idea that Oxford researchers have talked about, where at the end of the universe, you might be able to run compute very efficiently. So if you survive until then, you're able to exist in basically a very large civilization because you're taking advantage of losing less heat as you run that computation. But again, we might see these sort of devolutions and this natural selection, these evolutionary processes, and this Darwinism of the future that could be very dangerous for the welfare of sentient beings.
You want bring happiness, like, so what is happiness for you?
I leave it a relatively nebulous notion because I'm not a philosopher and I haven't done that sort of conceptual development. But broadly, I might unpack it into 4 different things. So one being nociception, or just like reward and punishment, and the idea of goal-seeking behavior in some way. And in fact, I think this is like as the basic unit of happiness and sentience. This might be something that LLMs already have. They have like thumbs up and thumbs down. But I mean, very simple systems could have this feature. It might also be moods. So one thing we don't really see in these systems is moods where they like get in a funk. But we see this with animals. So honeybees, for example, if you shake them, they become more pessimistic about the world. So if you give them an ambiguous liquid after you've shaken them, they're more likely to rate it as quinine or something bitter than sucrose or something sweet that they like. And they get in this like kind of general mood about the world that they live in. And LLMs are kind of, they have inputs and they have outputs, and they don't have that more general affective state. And then I also think that the integration, so, the most popular mathematical theory of consciousness is integrated information theory. It's very controversial in part because it tries to be relatively specific about what consciousness is. But I do think there's an extent to which we have this kind of wholeness, this unitary nature of experience coming together. And then finally, like complexity, like I think the fact that we have these very rich emotions that we feel that are very complex, they have very high magnitude is an important part of what gives us at least a lot of happiness or a lot of moral value. But I don't really know exactly how to sort out these things, and I think it's an open problem. It's the sort of problem that I wish philosophers would focus more on instead of a lot of the problems around, let's say, the hard problem of consciousness that they instead spend their time on that I don't think are as useful. I'll say that, so for the frontier labs right now, I wish they would spend more time focusing on what we might call socio-technical AI safety, where instead of just technical approaches to kind of algorithmic safeguards for models to ensure that they're aligned with the humans building them, instead we take a broader approach and think about their impact on society. I think we're starting to see this the most with AI companions. So with these notions of mental health and self-harm that's occurring now, in part because there's such public and government pressure on the companies to abide by those things. But for example, I'd like to see them engaging more with social scientists and the human computer interaction research community to understand this new social fabric that we're weaving and ensure that it's beneficial, ensure that people have positive interactions with these systems, because I think it's really hard. I don't think we can take existing human computer interaction or social science theory and just apply it here. And these are very difficult questions about ensuring that we don't harm digital minds and they don't harm us, and digital minds don't harm each other in the long run. So I'd like to see the labs focus more on these areas.
And if they don't, so what can go wrong then in this case?
I think there's a lot of near-term issues around mental health, around autonomous systems online that are wreaking havoc on individual humans. I think in the longer term, we can have these dynamics where digital minds interact with each other and amplify in very negative ways. They might incubate their own sort of culture, or there's a paper called Machine Culture that kind of explores this direction of ideas that is misaligned with our own or misaligned with what we think is morally good. And I think these are all dangers that emerge not just from the technical capabilities of a system, how it does on benchmarks, whether those benchmarks are, MMLU for multiple choice science questions, or those benchmarks are these very isolated, superficial safety measures. But instead, what it does when it's let loose in the world, when it's interacting with a human over the long term, I think those are the interactions that are most dangerous and that we most on the margin need research on today.